Hello and welcome to Old Women Who Write, a podcast. I guess it's a podcast. I don't even know exactly what a podcast is, although I listen to them all the time. I'm Jean Palin, and my guest today is LuWanda Cheney. LuWanda is a phenomenon to me in a lot of ways. One is how she's lived her life and what she's had to contend with in her life. I'm not going to talk a lot about her biography because it's sort of connected to the book we're going to talk about that she wrote, but I'll have information about her on the website when I publish this interview. LuWanda has, to my knowledge, and correct me if I'm wrong, LuWanda, 4 books. Is that right?
Five
Oh,
now.
I missed one.
Yeah.
Okay, I'll tell you what
One's
I
a
have.
family
I have,
history, so
I have Splintered, which is a book we're going to talk about in a little more depth. Secrets,
yes, it's a novel.
Words Have Wings,
That's an anthology.
and On Her Feet.
Yes. And then I have Proud and Gentle Folk.
What is that?
Proud and
Yes.
Gentle Folk, which is a history of the Overbay family, which is my grandparents and before that.
And what is describe what On Her Feet is?
On Her Feet is the story of my adopted daughter who at age 14 jumped off a roof thinking that it would be fun. And her friend went first and didn't get hurt. And to my daughter, who's very, very black and white, that was indication that it would be fine. And she landed on her rear end on a slate sidewalk and got a permanent spinal cord injury. And she had 8.5 hours of surgery and came out, and they told me she'd never walk again. A couple of days later, she says, "Mommy, everybody keeps asking me to wiggle my toes and I don't feel my feet. Am I going to walk again?" And I said, "Yeah, it's going to be really, really hard and it's going to hurt a lot, but you're tough." Doctor calls me out in the hall and he says, "Do you not get it? She's never going to walk again." And I said to one of the most brilliant doctors in the world, "Do you not get it? She's only 14. We're not going to tell her that."
Mm-hmm.
And so Ashley had to decide whether she was going to believe this team of brilliant doctors or her mom, and she decided to go with me.
So this book is that story.
Yes, and it's a very inspirational story, and she wrote part of it. She wrote little sections, so that's what that is.
Okay. So you have written in memoir, nonfiction narrative,
Yeah.
and an anthology you put together, a family history, and what did I miss? Secrets. What is Secrets?
Secrets is a novel.
A novel. Oh, yes, you did a novel.
She's an 11-year-old girl that has found out that her mother had quite a big secret, and she thinks, "Gee, I wonder if other people have secrets." And she starts spying on people. She looks in their windows and sneaks around and everything. So it's a little bit of a Peyton place, only with an 11-year-old seeing things she shouldn't see. She doesn't really understand them. So
Right. Got it.
that's what that is.
Okay. Do you think it's unusual to be writing in such different formats?
Well, if somebody reads my biography, they'd see that I've had a very varied life. And I'm not a person that likes to be categorized. I don't fit in any kind of a box.
Yeah.
So if I felt like writing something and I thought, "Oh, this will be interesting," and I did it, I didn't really think about the genre.
Gotcha.
In fact, when I first probably started writing, I probably didn't even know what a genre was.
Right, right. Well, and let me say about LuWanda, by the way, that LuWanda is a member of the Facebook group Old Women Who Write also, which is where I met her. So I'm fascinated with.
Wonderful group, wonderful
Yeah,
group.
it is a wonderful group. I encourage everyone out there watching this to join Old Women Who Write. The intention of that, as well as this website, of course, is to encourage women in their 70s, 80s, and 90s to write. And for me, that's a way of reclaiming who we are in this society.
Exactly.
For me, there's a small p political
Mhm.
thing going on here. All right, so let's talk about, you've done a lot in your life. We don't have time to go into it now, but writing has always been present. I see that.
Yes, yes.
Okay, let's talk a little bit. Let's talk about Splintered. I read Splintered and I was very moved by the story, by the excellent writing, by the courage of the narrator, courage of the writer. And this usually wouldn't go in that list of compliments, but also that despite what happens in this story, what happens in your life, there's not a self-pitying word in the book, not one, to me. There is confusion, there is pain, there is sorrow, there is anger, but there's no self-pity. And I found that so lovely.
Oh, thank you. Well, my mantra is it is what it is. Deal with it. And that, that got me through cancer, got me through the things that happened in the book. When you sit around and you're feeling sorry for yourself all the time, you don't move forward, you don't get beyond it. And people say to me, how can you talk about that book without crying? I said, well, I'm not there. I'm way past that.
Yes.
Everything that happened is gone. And I talk about it not because I want anybody to feel sorry for me or anything like that. It's because I want people to know that bad things happen.
Yes.
And we need to be aware of that because we can't stop them from happening unless first of all, we know that they do happen. And secondly, maybe we recognize some of the signs that maybe a bad thing is happening here. And that's why I wrote it.
Let's talk about Splintered and the bad thing. What we're talking about is your life and child abuse, sexual child abuse, and other forms of child abuse committed by a stepfather.
Right.
And it is heartrending to think of what's happened to this little child, because there were other forms of cruelty, of killing a pet,
Right.
ways of punishing you that were horrendous. That several things about it. One, that kind of abuse not only leaves scars, it can lead to what it led to in your case, which is not being there, led to what we used to call multiple personalities,
Right.
to dissociative
Identity
disorder. Talk about what that looked like for you. How did that manifest?
Well, after one of the really horrendous things, I don't want to go too much into detail so people can read the book and go along as it happens. But a pet of mine was killed and I was sent to find it in the most horrific way. And in the book, it says, and somebody was screaming and screaming and screaming. Maybe it was me. And at that moment, I disassociated. And of course, I didn't know, nobody else knew. And when I woke up the next morning, I didn't know where I was and I didn't know who any of the people, I didn't recognize my mother or anybody. And I had a little sister that looked familiar. And she actually, she was only like 4 years old, but she knew that I was two different people. And she would help me and tell me that you're supposed to do this, you're supposed to go there and do that. But I kept wondering, why do they call me LuWanda? Why are all these people calling me that name? Who is that? Who am I? And I would hear a little girl crying, and for years and years and years. Even after I became a stockbroker, I was having lunch one day with one of my clients. We used to go every month, go out to lunch, and she was a psychologist. And I said, do you hear that? Do you hear that? I hear a little girl crying. And she was used to this because I guess it happened all the time. And she said, I think it's in your head.
Uh-huh.
And so that was the beginning of me, getting some treatment for it. But multiple personalities, to me, the way that I experienced, is not waking up one morning and you're an alligator, and the next day you're this, and the next day you're that, and then all of this stuff that you see in the movies. I think that's way, way overblown. It's displaced memories. So it's a matter of forgetting things and doing something and not knowing that you did it, or the doctor will give you some pills and you think you're taking them every day, and one day you open your desk drawer and there's all the pills in there. So one part of you said, I'm not going to take pills, and you don't know, and you don't know why. And sometimes I'd go to my closet and there'd be beautiful designer suit in there that was perfectly appropriate for a stockbroker. And I'd ask my daughters, is this yours? Is this yours? Where did this come from? You bought it. No, this one. Where did this one come from?
Oh.
And they'd tell me it was mine, and I'd try it on, and it obviously been altered. The hem was right. Everything was perfect about it. And I had no memory of purchasing it or anything like that. So that's how the switches were for me, like that. And ultimately, they all merged together, except the original child. The original child is gone. And I do not have any details of at the worst thing, which was rape. I do not remember the actual thing. That's gone, and that's a good thing. I remember right up to that. I remember right after that. But the other personalities, the artistic one, the writer, the student, all of those parts of me, they're all meshed. And even the little, I had a personality that I called the protector, who would talk back to teachers and things like that. And at this point, at age 82, I'm one of the nicest little old ladies you're ever going to meet. The nicest can be. You cross me and I'm a son of a bitch in less than 2 minutes. So, and people know that in the neighborhood. When I came here, people were stealing mail and stuff like that. And, we put a stop to that. And, so that's a kind of an odd aspect.
Maybe you could write a book called
Right.
the Benefits of Dissociative Identity Disorder.
And maybe the only other time that any benefit of it comes out is I am sometimes able to do surgical procedures like endoscopies with no anesthesia, because I'm thinking, I'm old. I maybe shouldn't get put to sleep. I might not wake up. And so I do things like that. And afterwards, doctors say, I don't think I could have done that. But I just think about something else. I'm not being a different person. I'm just, I'll think about writing, or I'll think about what I'm going to have for lunch when I get out of there.
Brains are incredible, aren't they?
So yeah, we can do a lot more than we think we can, and way more than I'll probably ever do. But the brain is a tremendous.
The stunning thing to me is that it went on into your being an adult.
Yes, because nobody knew, nobody guessed it. And one of the reasons that I wrote the book too is that readers there may be some readers that identify with it and think, gee, that's kind of like me. And maybe they'll find out, or maybe somebody will recognize that a family member maybe is having that kind of a problem.
Yes.
And
well, that was one of the questions I wanted to ask you, was why did you write it? Were there other reasons? You said that's one of the reasons.
I started writing it a long time before I knew about that.
Oh, you did?
I just started writing. There's something in me that wants to write things down. I've been doing that. I think the first little book I wrote, I was 6 years old, and it was a little Easter Bunny story, little tiny little thing. And when I was 11, I sent a story about a fire in Valdez, Alaska. Several buildings burned in the middle of the winter, and I sent it to Jack and Jill magazine. and they didn't buy it. And I said, okay, I can't write. I gave up on it. But now I realize that it was talking about frostbite and terrible, terrible things. They weren't going to put that in a children's, magazine. But I just have to write things down. And I cut 30,000 words from Splintered because I realized, well, this is interesting, but it's not part of this story.
Yeah.
And I save them. Someday I'll maybe put them somewhere else, or maybe they'll become a short story. But there's something about getting your thoughts on paper, and I write longhand. And then later on, when I read them, sometimes I didn't realize that's where my thoughts were going until I see it written down. And, that to me, the longhand, that train of thought is an important thing.
It's the right brain connection.
Yeah. And
I believe that.
I don't understand. Well, I do understand it, but for me, it's not to outline everything and so I'm going to write 2,000 words in this amount of time. I write what I write. It might be 2 words today. It might be 3,000. I might stay up 2 days and not sleep and write, that's different.
Let me ask you some questions about the characters in your book. First of all, your family was very, very poor. Very,
yes.
very poor.
And it was during the war, so everybody was poor at the time.
Well, no, not everybody. There were people making money off of munitions and.
Well, yeah. Everybody we knew.
Everybody you knew, right. But really poor.
Right.
And your family was very. I'm trying to think what the word. I want to say country. I don't know.
Yes.
That a good word to use? I don't mean it.
Derogatory. Well, my grandmother was from Texas, so we picked up a lot of things from her. And my grandfather was Apache, Mexican combination, something like that. He said that Geronimo was my great grandfather. I don't know about that. Can't prove that. But I marked a little section about the grandmother that might give readers an idea of the family.
I would love
the book
because your grandmother was a hero in the book.
Yes, she was. Let's see, where is it? Okay, this is. I'll start right here. This is after my mother, who's pregnant with my daughter, or my little sister, has come home to where the grandparents are. This is after supper. Aunt Boney took me out back to the outhouse. Unlike most outhouses, this one had a window, a real one with glass and snow-white curtains starched and ironed. On the shelf opposite the window was a half-gallon amber glass bottle of Clorox and a can of lye. With these 2 things, there was no smell. Aunt Boney pointed to an old Sears catalog that had been nailed to the wall. After you go, she said, tear off the page, crinkle it up to make it soft, then wipe yourself. She held me high above the dark hole. I went, then Aunt Boney put me up on her shoulders and carried me inside. Grandpa rolled the little bed he had made for me out from under Aunt Boney's bed. It was feather bedded and spread with one of Grandmommy's quilts. This one shells pieced together from scraps of old silk party dresses. At the head of the bed lay a pillowfish with blue button eyes, mouth embroidered red, scalloped scales in pink, purple, blue, and a purple velvet tail. I floated on a feathered sea amongst the shells, clinging to my stuffed fish with a full belly, the first in I don't know how long, and I was pretty sure we'd eat again the next day. My grandmother was a great cook, and they had all kinds of things. Just a little bit more here. It could give you an idea of the grandmother. The door had been left open just a little, and in the light of the kerosene lamp, I could see Mama sitting at the kitchen table, hunched over the table, her big belly covered by her faded house gown. Grandmommy reached for the blue speckled kettle on the wood stove and poured coffee into Mama's cup. Mama added 2 spoonfuls of sugar and lots of cream. Grandmommy looked at her over the top of her glasses. When Grandmommy looked at you with those clear gray eyes, you knew she could see right inside your heart. There was no use lying, not to her. Nobody lied to Grandmommy. Betty Lou, where's your husband? Gone. Gone? Isn't he coming to be with you when the baby's born? If he did show up here, which I doubt, I'd cut out his gizzard. My husband, if you can call him that, went out to get cigarettes and left me waiting in a Rat Trap hotel. At first, I thought he'd gone drinking. I thought he'd be home any minute, then pass out like usual. But he never came back. Merciful heavens. On the wall behind Grandmommy, a Grandmommy shadow. The shadow's hand flew up to cover its mouth. My grandmother was Pentecostal, preacher's daughter, very, very religious, very good people. My grandparents were. And that's probably the only reason I survived my life.
Well, let me ask you about that, because it was clear that your grandmother and your Aunt Boney
yes,
were
tall and
there were
thin.
heroes in the book.
Yes,
they were the heroes.
Yes,
but they could not protect you.
No.
And
No.
was that, do you think, because of that day and age where they couldn't intrude on?
I think my mother was a very strong person. And of course, grandparents have no rights legally, which they still don't today. And my mother was headstrong. My mother did what she wanted to do. And they knew that something was wrong. I don't think they knew how bad it was, but they didn't trust this guy. They didn't trust him, and they knew that I'd be better off, with them. But my mother was easily persuaded. The book has many, many instances where this guy lied to her, and she was naive, and she believed him.
Well, let me ask you, because that's what I was going to ask you next. Your mother is a very complex character, I think,
yes.
In this book. And if I understood the book correctly, eventually she knew what had happened to you.
Eventually she did.
And she let it happen.
Yeah.
And yet you loved her.
Yes.
And isn't that the conundrum for almost any abused child?
Well, I think that, as an adult woman, able to look at women and think, don't be stupid, leave this jackass, whatever you want to call him. Don't put up with this stuff. Can't you believe that he's lying to you? I can see that as a grown woman. But I can also see a woman being naive and not really understanding. And, he would tell a pretty story. That was a monster. That wasn't me. I'll never do it again. And blah, blah, blah. And so I think that she was caught up in that, things that I overheard, like telling Aunt Boney that she had a brand new expensive car. She liked Cadillacs, and she was a piano player, so she worked hard. And Aunt Boney said, "Where'd you get the car?" And she said, "Well, he bought it for me." "Well, where'd he get the money?" "Oh, he's got a big government check coming. It's not here yet, so I paid for it, but he's going to give me the money back." And then in her mind, he had convinced her that he had bought her a car. And anybody could see that wasn't
she was also
true.
She was also very self-centered.
Yes, she was.
Which added, it wasn't just naivete. It was a lot of self-interest in maintaining the relationship.
She used to say, and I was being the great Betty, playing the piano, and everybody was loving me. And when I grew up, and I'd go back and visit once in a while, I was on the East Coast, they were on the West Coast, and I'd go visit her, and she'd say that. And all of a sudden, I remember one time I thought, she's serious. I thought it was kind of a joke. I thought, she's serious. I was being the great Betty.
Yes.
And she was very good at playing the piano, and she did end up in a big house and all that kind of stuff through hard work. She envisioned herself even better than she was. She played background music on an Ed Sullivan show up in Alaska. And I think in her mind, she was the star of the show. She wasn't the background piano. She would have thought that the whole show revolved around her and that they couldn't have had a show without her. And that, I think, was a way to escape. That was a way not to be, I'm poor, I'm dirt poor, I'm always going to be poor, I'm going to be somebody. And then when she did get out of that, I think that meant more to her than it should have. You know, there comes a point when we have to realize that we're not.
And did you, you don't talk about it, if I'm remembering right, explicitly in the book, but did you have to go through a conscious process of forgiveness of your mother?
I think that I kind of detached, disassociated maybe from the situation. Their dissociation only happens to children, usually under the age of 6, that have been badly treated, and it's a mechanism of the brain to protect you so that you can survive these terrible, terrible things. And then the aftermath of that is that sometimes when things get a little bit too rough to handle, you just don't deal with it. It's not there. And so that was one good thing of dissociative identity disorder, is that even as an adult, I didn't have to deal with all that stuff. You know, I didn't have to hate her. I didn't have to do that. And the book starts out the first time I killed him.
Well, just stop, because I want you to read that first part. So don't give it away. It's the most effective first lines in a book that I have ever heard.
The first time I killed him, he was somewhere in Idaho. The 2-story house set up on the rise, bathed in pale moonlight. There were no clouds in the ghastly white and desolate sky. The wind held its breath, and the birds had gone and buried their song. Nothing as far as the eye could see except the house and a dead black tree that stood in front and off to the right. I started up the twisting path which led me up the rise and past the mailbox on which someone had scrawled his name, Clayton Stout. In the eerie white lightness of this silent place, I moved in slow motion up from the hollow. My bare feet scarcely touched the ground, as if I were floating. Slowly, I climbed 6 steps onto a wide porch with a banister all around. The kind of porch I thought I might have someday, the kind where you expect to find wicker and ice-cold lemonade. I crossed the porch and stood before the door. On my left, a solitary chair. The colors on the cushion now faded, the same drab gray as the purple paint. A spider web hung suspended from the arm of the chair to the door frame. A common housefly, caught in the delicate strands, struggled to free itself from certain death. The door opened. Clayton Stout stood waiting. He was much smaller than I remembered. I expected someone more sinister. He seemed so ordinary. Checkered shirt, lumberjack boots, brown hair brushed back into a wave. Nothing to distinguish his insipid face except the eyes. I recognized those evil yellow eyes and the grinning, leering smirk. He knew why I had come. His eyes widened, and I saw myself reflected in them as I slowly raised my right arm, carefully placed the .357 Magnum against his left temple, and pulled the trigger. The shot thundered, reverberating in my ears. I waited for him to die, my heart thumping against my ribs.
Stop
and
there.
The next time I killed him, and then she kills him 3 different times, because of course this is it's not a murder story. And I did
such an effective opener.
I did have a few years of thinking about going and finding him and killing him. I really did. And it wasn't so much as revenge. It was to keep him from hurting any other, little girls. And it's not in the book, but I even one time walked into a psychiatrist's office unannounced And I said, I'm crazy. I need to be in a mental institution. And he said, what are you talking about? And I said, well, I want to kill this guy. And I told him the story. And he says, did you buy a gun? I said, no. Did you buy any poison? No. He said, you're not going to kill him. He said, this is fantasizing and it's good for you because it's a way to get him out of your head. And eventually, when I did have a chance, when I actually could have, I realized that he's not even worth it.
Yeah.
It's not even worth me giving another thought to it. And I never really did. And now when I talk about him, he's like a character in a book.
Yes.
You know, it's
Yes. Wow.
things change.
Well, LuWanda, this is wonderful. I want to tell you, time has flown. Can you believe?
Yes, it has. It's so fun to be
It
here.
is so fun. I'm so really, this job, which I invented, called interviewing writers,
Wonderful,
is
wonderful.
so rewarding, so
Yeah.
rewarding. And for one thing, I get to read the books. You know, I'm so grateful, and I want to encourage everyone out there to go buy and read Splintered, because you will be happy that you did, because you will appreciate the writing, even if it isn't your subject area. So what? You know, I had to stop sometimes and reread a sentence because it was so lovely. It was written in such lovely fashion.
Oh, thank you.
So go buy Splintered by LuWanda Cheney. You will be happy that you did. I thank you for being here. Thank you for talking to me.
Thank you for having me. I always enjoy meeting readers. Hi, all you guys out there.
All right. And we will see you next time on Old Women Who Write.
Okay.